Not play champions for a week. Entire week. Pokemon champions, let's go. Pokemon champions. We are back. We are back. We are back, not logging in for an entire week. Okay. Update. See if we can recruit. Can we recruit? We are at maximum. Let's return some Pokemon. Ba-ba-ba. Let's return some Pokemon. Do you know what's good to return? Heat Rotom. How do we get more space in our box? Let me see. Let's increase box size, ranking. Purchase the membership. So you have to purchase the membership. Oh, or return. So return, that's pretty annoying. You have to pay. You have to pay. You have to pay, it says. Well, I do not want to pay. Heracross, I guess I can remove, right? I don't use Heracross. It's pretty annoying to not be able to get more Pokemon. Starter pack increase. So we need this. Don't know what do we want to return. I don't use Heracross anymore, although maybe I can return Heat Rotom, Feraligatr, Goodra. Return Heracross, because we don't need a Heracross. Basco Legion. Orphaludon. Nothing amazing here though. No Pokemon. We run out of space, man. So I think I may have to return some Pokemon. 50 spaces. Again. me try one of those YouTuber team. So it's Archaludon, Sableye, Basculegion, Dragonite, and Sinistcha. I have Basculodon. The only thing I don't have is Sableye. I need Sableye. I need to get the Sableye from Pokemon Go. Get the Sableye. Sableye Champions Pokemon Go. Sableye is a bee. Focus Sash. Rosalie Berry.
I've got 2 young boys, and one of the things I work on with them is like, you should feel your emotions. It's not about stuffing them down. It's certainly not what Stoicism is about. Stoicism is about processing those emotions, understanding them, not being led by them or ruled by them, but nevertheless understanding them, being aware of them. And that's why I go to therapy, and it's why I love therapy. But also, I'm very busy, like a lot of people, and so I do my therapy online. And that's where today's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. What therapists do is they listen, they ask questions, they give you space to figure stuff out that in the busyness of a very busy life, you'll have the space to figure out and explore. In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, BetterHelp is sponsoring this video, and together we're pushing back against this stigma around mental health, and we want to encourage people to get support from a licensed therapist. If you think you could benefit from speaking with a licensed therapist, you can click the link in the description or just go to betterhelp.com/dailystoic to match with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. You'll get 10% off your first month of therapy if you go to betterhelp.com/dailystoic. Every event has 2 handles, one by which it can be carried and one by which it can't. If your brother does you wrong, don't grab it by his wrongdoing, because this is the handle incapable of lifting it. Instead, use the other, that he is your brother, that you were raised together, and then you will have hold of the handle it carries. The famous journalist William Seabrook suffered from such debilitating alcoholism that in 1933 he committed himself to an insane asylum, which was then the only place to get treatment for addiction. In Asylum, he tells the story of the struggle to turn his life around inside the facility. At first, he stuck to his addict way of thinking, and as a result, he was an outsider, constantly getting into trouble and rebelling against the staff. He made almost no progress and was on the verge of being asked to leave. Then one day, this very quote from Epictetus about everything having 2 handles occurred to him. "I took hold now by the other handle," he later related, and carried on. He actually began to have a good time there. He focused on his recovery with real enthusiasm. "I suddenly found it wonderful, strange, and beautiful to be sober," he said. "It was as if a veil or a scum or a film had been stripped from all things visual and auditory. It's an experience shared by many addicts when they finally stop doing things their way and finally open themselves up to perspectives and wisdoms and lessons of those who have gone before them. There's no promise that trying things this way will work, that grabbing the different handle. There's no promise that it will have these momentous results, but why continue lift by the handle that hasn't worked?" One of my other favorite quotes from Marcus Aurelius, he talks about being like the animal fighter at the games, torn up and bloodied and near death. It's begging to go out and fight again. He was saying, this is like us. We're just trying to do things the same way as we've always done them. And then that ties into that expression about how insanity is trying things the same way over and over again, expecting different results. We constantly pick things up by the old handle of taking them personally, of focusing on what's not in our control, skepticism, cynicism, whatever it is, right? We all have these tendencies to look at things a certain way. Maybe that's why you're always fighting with your spouse about a certain issue, or your own parents about a certain issue, or maybe whenever you get stressed, this is the behavior that you engage in. That's what I think Seabrook was doing. And the idea is, well, what if you tried it by a different handle? As I talked about before, there's more than one handle. There's an unlimited amount of handles, stories, options, approaches you can take to things. So why do the one that you've always done? Why do the one especially if it doesn't work? Why not try something new? Look for the generous interpretation. Look for the one that gets you out of your comfort zone. Look for the one that challenges you. Look for the one that makes you open-minded, open-hearted. Look for the one that makes you try something that you're not inclined to do. Look for the one that makes you better. Look for the one that makes other people better. That's the idea. Fortune doesn't have the long reach we suppose. She can only lay siege to those who hold her tight, so let's step back from her as much as possible. Machiavelli, who supposedly admired Seneca, says in The Prince that fortune is a woman and it is necessary in order to keep her down, to beat her and struggle with her. Even for the 16th century, it's a pretty horrifying image. But for a ruthless and endlessly ambitious ruler, it was par for the course. But is that the kind of life that we're after? Now compare Machiavelli's view with Seneca's. Not only is he saying that the more you struggle with fortune, the more vulnerable you are to it, but he's also saying that the better path to security is in the impregnable wall of philosophy. Philosophy, he says, helps us tame the mad frenzy of our greed and tamp down the fury of our fears. In sports or war, the metaphor here would be the choice between a strategy of endless, exhausting offense and a strategy of resilient, flexible defense. Which will you play? Which kind of person are you? Only you can answer this question, but you would be remiss not to consider the ultimate end of most of the princes in Machiavelli's books and how few of them died happily in bed, surrounded by their loved ones. I think what we're talking about here is something Nassim Taleb talks about, which is how dependent is your life, your lifestyle, your business? How dependent is it on luck? How dependent is it on things outside your control? You know, are you someone who needs things to always be going well? Do you schedule down to the minute and then one thing goes wrong, ripples through your day? Or do you cultivate that kind of anti-fragility, that kind of resilience, that flexibility that allows you to absorb and bob and weave and change and adjust? I think too many of us don't have enough slack. We are too dependent on fortune, and this is what makes us anxious. This is what makes us nervous. This is what makes us always busy, always doing, always shoring things up. Try to design a life that's got some give to it, that doesn't require you to hold fortune so close, that doesn't require you to watch the market returns every day, that doesn't put you at the mercy of your boss's moods, that doesn't force you to live paycheck to paycheck. Try to create some distance, a buffer, a moat around you that protects you from the whims of fate, because fate is and always has, as Seneca says, doing their own thing, behaving exactly as they please, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of that. You could enjoy this very moment, all the things you are praying to reach, by taking the long way around, if you'd stop depriving yourself of them. Ask most people what they're working towards, and you'll get an answer. I'm trying to become insert professional, or they'll tell you they're trying to get appointed to some impressive committee or position, to become a millionaire, to get discovered, to become famous, whatever. If you ask them a couple more questions, such as, why are you doing that? Or what are you hoping it'll be like when you get it? And you'll find that at the very core of it, people want freedom. They want happiness. They want the respect of their peers. A Stoic looks at this and shakes their head at the immense effort and expense we put into chasing things that are simple and straightforward to acquire. It's as if we'd prefer to spend years building a complicated Rube Goldberg machine instead of just reaching out and picking up what we want. It's like looking all over for your sunglasses and realizing they were on your head the whole time. Freedom, that's easy. It's in your choices, the Stoics would say. Happiness, that's easy. It's in your choices, the Stoics would say. Respect your peers. That too is in the choices you make. All of that is in front of you. No need to take the long way to get there. It's actually like a viral email chain. You've probably seen it before, about the fisherman in Thailand or something, and the Western businessman sees him and he says, oh, you've got this little boat. Well, what if you got another boat and another boat? You scale this operation, you can make all this money. And the guy says, well, then what? And he's like, well, then you could retire and live on a beach somewhere. The guy says, but that's what I do now. I've experienced my own version of this as an author. It's been funny. I meet these really successful people who do the things that I sometimes wish I could do. They play professional sports. They have huge audiences, or they've made all this money. They have all this stuff, and you catch yourself being a little jealous, and they invite you over to their fancy houses, and you sit there and you go, man, wouldn't it be so cool to live this life? And then I find out the real reason they invited me over is that they want to learn how to write books. Right? Like, I'm jealous of their life, they're jealous of my life. I think this is what Marcus is saying, is that you can have what you want right now. And more importantly, the thing that you think will bring you something, peace, contentment, happiness, whatever, it's not going to happen. It's this horizon that you never quite meet. It's always a little bit out of view. Marcus is saying that we try to get our stuff the long way, the hard way, at the end of this long war, at the end of this long journey, right? After I become rich and successful, after I make it, after I win a Super Bowl, then I'll feel good. Then I'll be able to spend time with my family. Then I can be at peace, whatever. And you can have that right now. The beautiful and good person neither fights with anyone nor, as much as they are able, permits others to fight. This is the meaning of getting an education. Learning what is your own affair and what is not. If a person carries themselves so, where is there any room for fighting? Socrates famously traveled around Athens, approaching the people he disagreed with most and engaging them in long discussions. In these discussions, or whatever record we have of them, there are many examples of his conversation mates getting exasperated, upset, and aggravated by his many questions. Indeed, the people of Athens eventually got so upset they sentenced Socrates to death. But Socrates never seemed to get upset himself. Even when talking about matters of life and death, he always kept his cool. He was much more interested in hearing what the other person had to say than making sure he was heard, and, as so much of us insist upon, he was not worried about winning the argument. So the next time you face a political dispute or a personal disagreement, ask yourself, is there any reason to fight about this? Is arguing going to help with anything? Would an educated or wise person really be as quarrelsome as you might initially be inclined to be? Or would they take a breath, relax, and resist the temptation for conflict? Just think of what you could accomplish and how much better you would feel if you could conquer the need to fight and win every tiny little thing. I think about this when I log on to Twitter, which I sort of have to do for work purposes every now and then, and I watch the smartest journalists and public figures of our generation just waste the day arguing with each other about nonsense, shouting into the void about this or that, always angry, always sarcastic, always mean, and accomplishing what? Accomplishing fucking nothing. The wiser you get, the less you should care about piddly things that don't matter. One of the signs of getting older for me is that I find myself sucked into arguments less, I get upset less, I get in confrontations less, because they don't matter. I think what Epictetus is saying is the wiser you get, the closer you get to mastery and self-mastery, the less you should feel inclined to need to prove that to people, the less attracted you should be to talking. Robert Greene says, always say less than necessary. I think that's a sign of wisdom and strength, is that you can keep your mouth shut, you can let someone be wrong. If they're wrong, what do you care? And if you're right, being right is sufficient. You can say why you're right. You can, maybe explain your reasoning, but it doesn't weigh on your conscience if you don't manage to convince them and you don't stay up at night thinking of all the things you should have said. While it's true that someone can impede our actions, they can't impede our intentions and our attitudes, which have the power of being conditional and adaptable. For the mind adapts and converts any obstacle to its actions into a means of achieving it. That which is an impediment to action is turned to advance action. The obstacle on the path becomes the way. Today, things will happen that will be contrary to your plans. If not today, then certainly tomorrow. And as a result of these obstacles, you will not be able to do what you planned. That is not as bad as it seems, because your mind is infinitely elastic and adaptable. You have the power to use the Stoic exercise of turning obstacles upside down, which takes one negative circumstance and uses it as an opportunity to practice an unintended virtue or form of excellence. If something prevents you from getting to your destination on time, then this is a chance to practice patience. If an employee makes an expensive mistake, then this is a chance to teach a valuable lesson. If a computer glitch erases your work, then it is a chance to start over with a clean slate. If someone hurts you, it is a chance to practice forgiveness. If something is hard, it is a chance to get stronger. Try this line of thinking and see if there is a situation in which one could not find some virtue to practice or derive some benefit. The truth is, there isn't one. Every impediment can advance action in some form or another. I'm not saying that some terrible thing, awful, unfortunate, tragic event that happened is just wonderful. It's that the nature of that event presents within it opportunities to be great. Take the last couple years. No one would choose this. It's tragic. It's unfortunate. It's been ghastly in the immensity of the destruction with which it has wrought. But I have tried to focus on my family. I have tried to focus on being more community-minded, tried to focus on my stillness. I've tried to focus on improving my work habits. I've tried to focus on being present. I've tried to adjust my news habits. My marriage is better. I opened this bookstore, right? I have improved in innumerable ways. If you said, Ryan, you have to give all of that back, but there won't be a pandemic. Of course, I would say, oh, yes, of course. There's other ways to do it. But the thing happened, and it is a chance to step up, to grow, to change, to practice different virtues, right? That's what the obstacle is the way means. But second, if you notice the full quote from Marcus, and the obstacle is the way, I'm really talking about all forms of obstacles. But Marcus is specifically talking about difficult people. He's saying difficult people are a chance to practice these virtues. That when someone is frustrating or mean or stupid or annoying or dishonest or cruel or aggressive, these are opportunities to call from yourself positive virtues. Patience, kindness, forgiveness, creativity, etc. You got to use that situation. If you want more wisdom inspired from the Stoics, I send out one Stoic-themed email every single morning, totally for free. You can sign up at dailystoic.com/email. No spam. You can unsubscribe at any time. I think it's the best thing that I do. And it's a community of hundreds of thousands of Stoics all over the world. We'd love to have you at dailystoic.com/email. The best lessons are taught through stories. That's how humans have learned for thousands and thousands of years. There's a reason Jesus spoke in parables. There's a reason that the ancient Greeks had a whole genre of stories called kreyas. But the translator of Marcus Aurelius, Gregory Hayes, would say, exemplary stories followed by a memorable utterance. My name's Ryan Holiday. I've written a number of best-selling books that basically follow this formula. And for years on social media, we've been telling these stories on Daily Stoic and Daily Dad. They've reached millions and millions of people. And what we're going to highlight today are some of our best, most viral stories that can teach you or your kids or anyone watching some of the most powerful and important lessons you can learn in life. My all-time favorite Marcus Aurelius story comes at the depth of the Antonine Plague. It's ravaged Rome. That's not even the only crisis that happens in his reign. There's a flood, there's a coup, there's an invasion. He's just like besieged on all sides. Rome's treasury is depleted, things look very bleak. It's not clear even that the empire can continue. And so what does Marcus Aurelius do? He leads a 2-month sale of the palace furnishings. He sells his robes and his jewels. His wife sells their furniture. They sell down the palace furnishings to raise money. The idea being that the leader takes the hit first, that the leader eats last, as the expression goes. Like, Marcus could have made this somebody else's problem. He could have denied that there was a problem. He could have kicked the can down the road. Instead, he stepped up and he did the hard thing, and he did the hard thing as a bit of demonstrative leadership. And to me, that's what I love about Stoicism. It's an interior philosophy, but it's designed to shape your actions in the real world where the stakes are really high. Marcus Aurelius wasn't a philosopher. He was a leader who happened to be a philosopher. There's a great story about Thomas Edison. He's America's most successful inventor. He's towards the end of his life. He's a millionaire many times over. He's having dinner with his family, and a man rushes in and says, "The factory is on fire. You have to come quick." And Edison gets there, and it is. His life's work is up in flames, and there's no chance this fire's going out. But he finds his son. His son is standing there shell-shocked, and Edison grabs him, and he says, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." And I love that story so much because instead of crying, instead of weeping, instead of blaming, he's just taking this brief moment to enjoy the surreal, almost terribleness of his fate. He's finding something good in it. And the Stoics have this idea of amor fati, which Nietzsche perfectly encapsulates when he says, you don't just bear what is necessary, you love it. That's what amor fati means. It's a love of fate. And that's what Edison does. He tells a reporter, look, I've been through stuff like this before. It prevents a man from being bored. And he throws his life into rebuilding after this. He takes a loan from Henry Ford, and he's back up and running within 6 weeks and then within 6 months. So the idea is stuff is going to happen, and it can break your heart, it can break your spirit, or you can say, go get your mother and all her friends will never see a fire like this again, and you can love it and embrace it and turn it into the greatest thing that ever happened to you. 2,000 years ago, a young man named Zeno visits the oracle at Delphi. He asks for advice. What should I do? What's the secret to life? And the oracle tells him, you will become wise when you begin to have conversations with the dead. And it's not until many years later, when Zeno is in a bookstore and he hears the bookseller reading aloud a passage from Socrates, that it hits him. Reading is having conversations with the dead. Even now, we call reading the classic texts, including the ideas of Zeno and all the other Stoics, we call this the great conversation, because we're talking with people who are no longer with us. Socrates was dead when Zeno heard that bookseller bringing his ideas to life. Zeno is long dead, and I'm talking to you about him right now. We will become wise when we begin to have conversations with the dead, when we read and listen to the voices of the past. In October of 1962, John F. Kennedy wakes up in the White House and he's briefed by the CIA. The Russians have set up a series of ballistic nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba. And Kennedy has every reason to be upset, not just because this is dangerous, the world is now on the brink of nuclear war, but he had specifically talked to Khrushchev about this very plan and been assured that it was not going to happen. This was a provocation. Had it been taken as one, though, the world could have ended like that in a nuclear holocaust. Almost every single one of Kennedy's advisors told him the only option on the table was bombing Cuba. Those were the conservative ones. The aggressive ones said he had to bomb Cuba and East Berlin and Russia. This was a provocation, and provocation must be met with response. And Kennedy has the discipline, the perspective to step back and say, hey, what are they going to do after we do that? And he says, I think you guys are wrong, but I'm worried you're so wrong that no one's going to be around to say I told you so. And so in what became known as the 13 days, Kennedy does what leaders are supposed to do. He's very firm. This cannot be allowed to stand. But his eye is always on de-escalation. He is constantly finding ways to give his opponent a way out. The Romans called this the golden road. You want to pave a golden road behind your enemy to allow them to retreat. But eventually, Khrushchev partly comes to his senses. He backs out. Kennedy has back-channeled a plan to remove some American missiles from Turkey that he'd already known to be obsolete. He gives them something to trade for. This is what diplomacy and compromise is about. And he backs the world off from the brink of catastrophe and disaster. So my favorite thing about Epictetus is he's born a slave, and he finds himself a slave in the court of Nero. So here you have this guy, he has no power, no freedom, amidst incredible wealth, power, and opulence. But he comes to realize, watching how people act in Nero's court, that these supposedly free people aren't nearly as free as he thinks. He watches a man suck up to Nero's cobbler, like he's brown-nosing the guy who makes Nero's shoes because he wants to get in Nero's favor. One man comes to Nero and says, I'm down to my last $1 million. And then Nero says, oh my God, how can you bear it, right? Epictetus realizes, although he's been deprived of his physical freedom, he's actually less of a slave than all of these people who are a slave to their ambition, slave to power, slave to impressing other people, a slave to appearances, a slave to urges or mistresses. And so Epictetus realizes that freedom comes from the inside. Yes, people can bind us up in chains, he says, but they can't remove our power of choice. They can't change our ability to make our decisions, to set our own priorities. That's what Stoicism is actually about. And that's why the philosophy is popular, not just with Epictetus, a slave, but Marcus Aurelius, who's an emperor later in that same court. I got an amazing night's sleep last night. One, because my 6-year-old fell asleep in the car at like 6 o'clock, and I transferred him from the car seat to the bed, and it stuck, which is just magic, so he's in bed way earlier than normal. But I sleep really well every night because I have a 8 Sleep Pod 5 Ultra, which is 8 Sleep's best product. I've used 8 Sleep for many years now. It's just totally transformed how I sleep, made me sleep better, made my wife sleep better. So basically 8 Sleep is this topper that goes over your mattress. It can heat and cool both sides separately. It can raise and lower each side separately. So it helps you fall asleep faster, stay asleep, and then wake up better. And then I can check the app and it tells me my sleep score. It even helps me optimize my slept. If you want to survive the holidays like a pro and just generally sleep better, use my code DailyStoic at 8sleep.com/DailyStoic for up to $700 off the Pod 5 Ultra during 8 Sleep's biggest sale of the year. People don't know this, but John F. Kennedy very nearly lost the 1960 presidential election. In fact, he won by only about half a percentage point, and in the end, it came down to about 35,000 votes. So what happened? Martin Luther King was arrested right before the election on trumped-up charges and sentenced to 4 months on a prison chain gang. And his wife was actually very worried that he would be lynched or murdered in prison. And so she called both the Nixon campaign and the Kennedy campaign. Nixon, who was actually friends with Martin Luther King, decided not to get involved. He didn't want to piss off Southern voters. John F. Kennedy called the judge, called Coretta Scott King, and his brother also worked to get Martin Luther King released. And Martin Luther King would say after that he was stunned by this because Nixon had been his friend, and he said, I always regarded Nixon as a moral coward after that. And it was the news of this that rallied the black community to vote for John F. Kennedy in the election and won. It's really just a few seconds of courage that win Kennedy the election and lose Nixon the election. And I talk about this in Courage is Calling. You know, we think bravery is this big thing, but it's really a very small thing. It's an immediate thing. It was a call to Martin Luther King's wife. It was a call to a judge. It was the decision to get involved, to ignore the reservations. Marcus Aurelius says, just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. You do the right thing, and you trust that doing the right thing will pay off. You also trust in your ability to survive, even if people don't appreciate that you did the right thing, and courage is always better than cowardice. There's a pretty amazing story about Marcus Aurelius. Pretty late in life, he's seen leaving his palace in Rome, and he's carrying these tablets. And a friend says, where are you going? He says, I'm off to see Sextus the philosopher to learn that which I do not yet know. The friend marvels. He says, here's the most powerful man in the world, even as an old age, picking up his books and going to school. I think that's, in effect, what Marcus is. He remains a student. It's his notebook. It's his exercise book. It's his workbook. He's doing work on himself, even as an old man. And the fruits of that come down to us. It's just so wonderful to think of Marcus even as an old man. Maybe some of the lines in here he learned from Sextus the philosopher. He thanks Sextus the philosopher in book 1, the Debts and Lessons chapter. So the idea for Marcus was that you always stay a student. There's an amazing story about the actor George Clooney. He spends much of his early career struggling to get jobs. He goes into auditions and they never work out. Then he has this breakthrough. He realizes they are not the solution to his problem, but he is the solution to their problem. They are holding this audition because they need actors. They cannot start the movie or the play or the TV show without the right actor. So he flips his attitude about it and he starts to see himself as the solution to their problem as opposed to the desperate person hoping that they will do him a favor. And this is such a key Stoic exercise. Our perception is everything, right? Seneca says we dye events with our own color. We decide how we're going to look at it. We decide the perspective we're going to bring to it. Are we going to bring desperation or are we going to bring confidence? Are we going to see ourselves as coming from a position of weakness or from a position of strength? That's on you. You decide that. You control the attitude, the approach, the energy that you bring to a situation, and that will make you much more successful in those situations. I love that. There's a story that I tell in one of my books about Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, and Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five. And they're at this party of this billionaire. Kurt Vonnegut is teasing Joseph Heller, and he says, you know, how does it feel to know that the guy whose house we're in, some billionaire or whatever, made more money this week than your book will make in its lifetime? And he says, well, I have something that that guy doesn't have. And he says, what could that possibly be? And he says, I know what enough is. Well, I love that story because it's not, you know, after Joseph Heller writes Catch-22, he doesn't stop writing books. That's not the end of it. I think it's a difference between doing something from a place of needing to prove something or needing to like be something, and from a place of fullness where you're just like happy with who you are and you actually enjoy the work itself.
Dude, I'm gonna tell that story forever.
That book, The Greek Way, Robert F. Kennedy, when he's running for president, somebody gives him a copy of that book. It blows his mind. He hadn't been familiar with the Greek myths. When Martin Luther King Jr. is shot, he has to give this impromptu speech in Indianapolis. The crowd is just hearing the news at the same time he's hearing the news. And it's on the verge of this riot. And he gets up there and he gives this famous speech where he quotes Aeschylus from memory, which he had not read himself. He had gotten from The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton. Basically, there are riots all over the country that night, but not in inner city Indianapolis, because in this moment, he draws on this line from Aeschylus about how our suffering teaches us, and this is how we discover truth. And there's just something so beautiful about, you know, this terrible moment of history drawing on this multi-century old bit of wisdom. The first thing to understand about Marcus is that he lived through a plague. You know, people sort of vaguely understood that the Antonine Plague happens in Marcus Aurelius' time. That's why it's called the Antonine Plague. And Marcus Aurelius mentions it obliquely a few times in Meditations. But I think it's only going through the COVID-19 pandemic over the last couple of years that helps one understand the way that an event like that would have shaped Marcus. One of my favorite quotes from Marcus, he says, there are two types of plagues. There's the one that destroys your life and the one that destroys your character. Understanding that Marcus would have seen all the kinds of extreme and callous and strange behavior that people you know and love may have exhibited over the last couple years during this pandemic. That helps us understand what he's talking about. And the quote holds true. There are people who maybe they didn't get COVID, but they caught something much worse, or they did get COVID and they lived through it, thank God, but they're carrying with them the effects of something much worse. Conspiratorial thinking, cruelty, indifference to other people. But Marcus's life is shaped by the plague. It's also an opportunity, a crisis for him to respond to as a leader. Actually, one of the things he learns from his stepfather, Antoninus, was to listen to experts. And this is why Marcus puts Galen, the great medical mind of his time, in charge of the pandemic response. But also the exercise of memento mori for the Stoics, the idea that life is short, that you could go at any moment. This is something Marcus would have experienced firsthand. He witnessed death all around him. Constantly, millions of Romans died in this horrendous plague. And ultimately, we think even Marcus Aurelius died of it. And his last words are a reminder to his friends who were crying over his deathbed, not to think of him, the singular individual, but all of the people who died of the plague, and all of the people who would eventually die, including potentially his friends themselves.
Edith Eger. Your audience probably know who she is. Edith, when she was 16 years old, growing up in Eastern Europe, she was going for a date with her boyfriend that night. She was trying to think about what dress is she going to wear, and her family get a knock on the door. Her sister, her, and her two parents get put on a train to Auschwitz. Within 2 hours of getting there, both of her parents are murdered. An hour or two later, she, as a 16-year-old girl, gets asked to dance for the senior prison guards. There's many things from that conversation that have never left me, Ryan. She said, the final thing my mother said to me, Edith, nobody can ever take from you the contents that you put inside your own mind. And then she says, when I was dancing in Auschwitz, I wasn't in Auschwitz. In my mind, I was in Budapest Opera House. I had a beautiful dress on, the orchestra was playing, the crowd were cheering. Then she tells me, I started to see the prison guards as the prisoners. They weren't free in their minds, I was. She said to me, Rongan, I have lived in Auschwitz, and I can tell you the greatest prison is the prison you create inside your own minds.
Well, there's a story about Epictetus. So Epictetus has this little shrine in his house to the gods, and he has this golden or silver lamp. He's, in bed, and he hears someone rustling. Someone has broken into his house. He makes his way down the hallway, and a thief has broken in and is in the process of stealing the lamp, and he sees him running away with the lamp. And Epictetus says, I'm a fool. You can only lose what you have. Tomorrow I will go and buy an earthenware lamp. And his point was that he had this thing that he didn't want stolen because it was valuable. The problem was him, not the thief. So he buys a cheaper lamp the next day. It's kind of a Diogenes the Cynic kind of thing. Like have fewer possessions and you're less vulnerable to fortune or misfortune. A philosopher goes to the house of a Stoic named Agrippinus. And he says, hey, I've been asked to attend this party that Nero's throwing on. We all know Nero is awful and corrupt and evil. I'm wondering whether I should go or not. I'm thinking about it, should I go? And Agrippinus says, yes, you should go. And the guy says, why? You're not going? And he says, yeah, but I didn't even think about going. His point is, Agrippinus wasn't, do I want to, do I not? He wouldn't even consider doing something like that would be so compromising or corruptive. The sort of hell yes or hell no rule. He's saying this for effect, a tad. But the idea is we should be really clear about what we are willing to do and what we aren't willing to do, the things we accept and the things we don't accept. We should have a clear sense of our moral compass, also our priorities, so we're not hemming and hawing. We're not having to ask for advice. We're not even thinking about it. It's a hard pass or it's an enthusiastic yes. There's this amazing story about Ulysses S. Grant. He goes to West Point as a young